So, Henny Hotu, Ima Taironika Tanaikatisa. Hello, everybody. My name is Jean-Luc Pierite. I'm from the Tunica-Biloxi tribe on my dad's side. My grandmother is Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. Uh, Today, for a bunch of public access, recognized stories, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Carolyn Dunn. Carolyn's life as a storyteller encompasses both poetry and playwriting, with works about family, grief, and resilience, and the landscape in all genres and in between. In addition to the award-winning Outfoxing Coyote, that painted horse press from 2002. Her books include Coyote Speaks in 2008, Echolocation, Poem Stories and Songs from Indian Country, LA, the Stains of Burden and Dumb Luck, um, and um and a collection of plays, the Freiburg Queen, Soledad, and Three Sisters, three plays by Carolyn Dunn, and decentered playwriting, co-edited with Leslie Hunter and Eric Micah Holmes. Her plays, The Freiburg Queen, Ghost Dance, and Soledad, have been developed and staged at Native Voices at the Autry, and her current works are in progress are the powwow comedy Chasing Tail Feathers, commissioned by the Oklahoma Indigenous Theater Company and Coyote Woman. TYA play, I'm going to ask you what TYA stands for, but TYA play commissioned for the Rising Youth Theater in Phoenix. So thank you for being here, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you. Halito, Chimichugma, Carolyn Dunn, Jehovah. I am really excited to be here with my relative and to be able to be on Bulbancha Public Access. My family is from Louisiana. My mom's family, my mom is a Takapa Ishak and a Tunica Choctaw Biloxi descendant. And on my dad's side, they are Cherokee Creek and Seminole Freedmen descent on my dad's side. So am a loud and proud Afro-Indigenous Creole. Happy to be here and representing our kinfolk
Yes.
on this show. So, and I'm really excited that you asked me to be on, especially with you, because I have great respect for the work that you do and just love you to pieces.
Oh, I love you back, love you back. I was you know, I came to you with the idea for this conversation because last year, last July, so now as of this time of recording, we chose July 1st to be the beginning of our year. And so
Mm,
a bunch of public access has grown from a project that was fiscally sponsored by the National Performance Network. And now we've amazingly gone through all of the hurdles of becoming a 501(c)(3), and a lot of that
yay! Oh my gosh.
a lot of that kicked off on July 1st of last year. And so how that happened was we had this commencement on the Lafitte Greenway in Palmancha in New Orleans. And Haley, Ida, and I, along with Palmancha Liberation Radio, Nate, and we had a couple of folks join us that weren't part of this dramatic reading that we were doing on top of the mounds of La
Mm,
Fête du Petit Blé ou l'Héroïsme de Pochahoma, which is the first a French tragedy that was written in Louisiana. So going back to the mid 1700s, by an officer that by the name of Villeneuve,
mhm.
and then that play in turn was around just before the Battle of New Orleans in 1811, 1812, when it was performed at the Orleans Theater. But basically, it was this retelling of a historical event that happened between two tribal communities. And the goal of the play was for Villeneuve to tell the people back in France, this is, this is sort of this through this
World. Yeah.
dramatization, this is the world of, yeah, the indigenous peoples. And so there's that angle. But what we want to do as an organization is take this play and take this opportunity of a revival, not just to translate it into our individual languages. So having this play be read in Tunica, have this play be read in Homa, those
Mhm.
are beautiful projects in and of themselves, but really thinking about how story lives in community and takes its own form and then has its own presentation within the different languages. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
then that would then in turn be a platform for many different people from all of our diverse
Mhm.
language preservation and revitalization efforts across Louisiana to come together and talk about what this story could mean for their community. So there would be a Kurivini telling of
Mhm.
the story. There would be all the different languages.
Right.
Um, so thinking about that and then thinking about like dramaturgy as a platform for social change, it was
Mhm.
just, I just had to like have this conversation slash brainstorming session with you
Mhm.
because of all of your work.
Right.
Um,
Oh.
so yeah, so I just
Mhm.
wanted to open up the conversation that way and really
Okay.
dig into some of your initial thoughts about how dramaturgy can be a platform for social change.
Oh my gosh, that is such a great question, and um, it's so loaded in terms of, when dramaturgy as a practice, and I know that you know this, but dramaturgy as a practice, like people don't really understand what that is because it is many different things, right? So in like a new play development process. You are, as the dramaturg, you were like the midwife of a particular play. I like to think of it that way. That you work with the playwright, you work with the director, sometimes in new play development, and help the playwright craft a story that they want to craft. Um, but dramaturgy, and so that's that part of it. And then if a play has already been produced, then as a dramaturg, you work with the director, you work with the actors, you work with the creative team to help again tell the story on stage, whether that's through design, whether it's through enhanced biographical or autobiographical information for the cast or historical information. So the dramaturg, when we talk about like the noun version, so the person version of the dramaturg is the person that is a midwife, sometimes a literary editor, a researcher, a historian, an actor sometimes. So there are all these roles. But then when we talk about the act of dramaturgy, right, and the act of it, it has been presented so much through a Western lens. And the work that I do as a dramaturg, especially with Indigenous communities, is to really focus the language, culture, and history and the land base of a particular community. And so I know that we wanted to talk about when I brought Three Sisters, which takes place, on the Tunica-Biloxi reservation. And when we brought it, and I wanted you to be in it. Do you remember that? When I tried to get
Yes.
you to come, but you had just been home, and I tried to get you to come back. Um, but that to me, and that is the work that I really am thinking about and talking about now is the community-based dramaturgy. So, working with the language, culture, and research program. So working with your mom, Donna, your sister, Liz, worked with them quite a bit on the language in the play, and not just the Tunica language, but we added some Choctaw in there. I know quite a bit of Choctaw, not as much as I'd like, but I know, my former spouse, that was his first language, so I learned a lot from him. I teach, our now adult children a lot of language, so I know a lot of Choctaw, a little bit of Creek, tiny bit of Tunica that I've learned, from your mom. Um, and and of course, being a Creole person, and my grandparents, when they moved to California in the 30s, so we
Mm,
left the community, 50 years before the tribe reorganized. So our family had been in California for 50 years before the tribe reorganized, and my grandmother's first language, and with all of her siblings, they all moved out with their families, was their first language. But when they got to California, they decided they wanted their children to be Americans. They didn't
mm,
want them speaking Acadian, or because they spoke Acadian,
mm,
didn't want them speaking Acadian or Kurivini or Choctaw, so we are starting over again. And they were very poor, and our community and in the 30s, and how poor it was then. And they moved to California, you know, and I think of in the sense of immigration with an E rather than immigration with an I,
mm,
because you still are within this, within the borders of the United States, but California is a very different world than Louisiana. So I think of Louisiana as the old country, right?
mm,
where where we come from. And so they made a concerted effort to not teach us our ancestral languages. And that was because they felt like the only way that we could survive in the new world of California was to be American. And talking about, Daryl Barthay talks a lot about, Americanization, especially in New Orleans around, the 1950s. And, my family was like, okay, we're going to California. We are going to be Americans. We're not going to be French people. We're not going to be French Afro-Indigenous people. We are gonna, learn. And so then you have my generation who we all took French in high school. All the
mm,
cousins did. And I remember my parents saying, why don't you guys take Spanish? Because it's more relevant in California. But we were like, look, this is one of our ancestral languages, and we want to know that side of us. And so there's always going to be, it seems like that generation that goes home, or that
mm,
generation that revitalizes language, that generation that is really concerned about ceremony and revitalization of ceremony. And I grew up with California Indians who were very much active in language revitalization and ceremonial revitalization. So that they were my influence. And so I just find it so interesting that there is always, there's the generation that left and decided we're going to be Americans. We're not going to speak, Acadian anymore. We're not going to speak Grivini. We're not going to speak Choctaw. We're not going to speak Ishakoi. We're not going to, use any of those words. But it's so interesting because all of the phrases that they used were translated from those languages into English. So, and I think about all these colloquialisms that my grandmother used to say. She used to say, "Oh, I'm sweating like a levy camp mule,"
mm,
and how place specific that is. And she used to say that, and they used to say "coup de like listen to that, like, I can't
Yeah.
believe it. Coup d'eau. So they would say these little phrases, or these colloquialisms that were very much, you know, Louisiana specific. And we grew up culturally as Afro-Indigenous Creoles. And I think of all of my California family, some of them who went back to Louisiana. And I think about them where like it seems like our generation now are the ones who are doing that revitalization work, are doing
Hmm.
that language revitalization, doing that ceremonial revitalization, because we learned it from our California folks, or we learned it and we understand the importance of the preservation of our culture because we don't speak the language anymore. I know, and I totally rambled, and because me, I'll talk forever, but about this is this is um this is all related. And so getting back to when I wrote Three Sisters, because all of my plays have all of the tribal representation in my plays has been all of the people that I was influenced by or the people that I am related to. So, I've got like, my MFA play was my Muskogee play. And then,
Hmm.
Three Sisters, I mean, not Three Sisters, Fry Bread Queen, even though it takes place in Navajo land, two of the women are, one is Creek and one's Cherokee. And
Hmm.
so, there's that aspect of, my family's identity. And then Soledad also is California Indians, but the father character, he's Cherokee from Oklahoma. And so then I felt like, well, I really, I wanted to talk about Louisiana Indians because we don't get talked about that much, and people
Hmm.
don't. And I think that because there's so much mixing in Louisiana,
Hmm.
that people forget that Louisiana is Indian country too, and has been since the beginning. And so I really wanted to honor, um, our kin folk, that our you and I and our relations, and wanted to write a story that talked about Louisiana Indians, but also talked about diasporic Louisiana Indians who return home. There's always like a return home, I feel like, in all of my plays. There's a reconnection to or a return to, and it's usually with family. And one of things that I was really committed to with Three Sisters, and especially it taking place in Louisiana, is working with um, your mother on language, and not just Tunica language and not just Choctaw, but French, and
Hmm.
being able to add, because I don't know any Tunica hardly at all. I know, like I said, a lot of Choctaw, some, Kurivini, Acadian, you know, um, but to be able to sit down, with her and be able to work with her in the linguistic sense too, was very powerful. And to present that piece to the specific community that the piece is about, utilizing, our indigenous languages in that play was very powerful. And it was a wonderful partnership with the Language Culture Resource Program, and being able to make that and for us, for my family to be able to reconnect with the community, that was
Hmm.
also very important. So it's all very tied in. It's very tied into um, me writing about this place, but have it only living in my imagination, because I had never been there. I hadn't been back. That was the first time that I had been. Well, I'd been to Natchitoches, but this was the first time that I had been back in Marksville, since my family left in 1931 after my great grandmother passed. So,
Mm.
um, So I really had to get my feet on the ground, and I really had to go see the water, and I really had to go see the places where they came from,
Mhm.
places where our community sprang from, and to go to the
Mhm.
mounds and, and to be able to be there and to have support from the tribe, I think was very important. Um, but to be able, like I said, really be engaged in a land-based dramaturgy, the play is very
Mhm.
important for me as a playwright and for me as um, a cultural person, to be able to reconnect with family and community. And that is the type of dramaturgy that I'm now invested in terms of, you know, really this not necessarily being an individual story, but it's the story of a community. And so the community worked on it, and the community helped me, and the community was engaged in it. And that was really important for me. I feel like I said
Mhm.
a lot, I just rambled. So, but yeah,
No, 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 no,
those
no.
were the key points that I
It
wanted
was
to speak about.
it was a lot of there are so many different places that we can go, and
Mm,
just to just to sit with that role of the dramaturge as the midwife.
mm,
um you know, I reflect because you're the work that you were pointing to and working with my mom at the language and cultural revitalization project, the and my sister and John and all
mm,
of them, but my mom specifically. I just some of like she goes through the like working with you goes through the stage reading and everything,
mhm,
and it gave her the opportunity to to do things in a staged environment that she often does in order to be able to do
mm,
the language and culture work, which
mm,
is the character that she was cast as. She really was, trying to tap into her grandmother, my great grandmother, Julia Norman, Julia Descon Norman, and really kind of like all the stories that came from her, and the voice that came from her, like that channeling, really kind of is like, okay, the story that's inside of mom, that she, she
yeah,
brings forward a lot. Anyway, it was, good to have that opportunity to kind of like, okay, we're going to take that energy and we're going to cast it into the story, and that character has that rootedness
mm,
that's there to then, she's a it it she was, we say storian but not storian.
yeah,
She's
yeah,
cast, but she's not necessarily like a character. Like this is a real thing. And I think like,
mhm,
there's that piece to it. And also, when you're talking about like the not just the Tunica, but the Choctaw and the French. What you might have noticed is one of the things that she does within her work is get really passionate about the
yeah,
loan words, because that's where the connections are. That's where communities touch each other. And we
mhm,
can, we have like the history, across the Gulf South of the Mobilian trade language, and
mhm,
here's the
mhm,
universal system
mhm.
of
Of
communication.
trade, yeah,
But more so like how do like those words pop up in how do your words pop up in my languages? What
mhm,
was that
mhm,
exchange like? And then that's what my mom like really gets like,
right,
you have to know this, because it's not just, you can't just have like 100% pure Tunica
Right, right.
worldview. It has
Uh,
to have
right.
that touching of the Choctaw
Yeah.
and the French. Yeah, so it's really nice to see that, for my mom have that
Uh-huh.
type of opportunity, and it's
Yeah.
do you see that like in the other plays like with the Fry Bread Queen and
Mm, mm,
Soledad, like do
mm.
you see our women especially kind of like bringing forward all of themselves and also all of their ancestors as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
within the work.
Definitely. We spent, I don't know, I think your mom and I and Sarah, the director, and Rain, our cousin Rain, and
Hmm.
because they were there, she and Patrick were there. And John, not so much John. John didn't cry, but I think that and my daughter Hanoki, who is also Mississippi Choctaw, um, they, and Hanoki is a playwright and actor, and Hanoki was cast as one of the sisters in the reading. And what I think that and especially because I didn't, know any Tunica at all. So when I wrote the play, it was at first all in English. But I tried and my grandmother was Anna Baradon, and she has been gone since 1972. So,
Mm.
and then her sister, my great aunt Corrine Baradon Linscomb, um, was, helped to raise me. So I think, I always think of Aunt Corrine as like my second grandmother.
Yes.
Um, and but I remembered the way that they talked and, the lilt that they had, right? That French lilt or that French way of speaking that they had. And so I tried to stay really true, especially in that character, because the character that your mom played, Tivan, Evangeline is her name, and T meaning could be auntie or little, petite,
Hmm.
either one of those, because we had family members who were um noted when was T-Bay and when was T-Ba, and T-Ba was the little bear and T-Bay was the little baby. So, again, so remembering people's nicknames and all of that. And just remembering the cadence and how they spoke. And having not, and like I said, my grandmother's been gone for a long time, and Aunt Crane has been gone also, since 1980. So I really had to go back, to my childhood and being raised by them and my Aunt Lawrence Collins, who also was, they were the original three sisters, if we think about it. They called themselves three sisters, they called themselves three musketeers, those three were tight, and they all went to California together after their mother passed away,
Mm.
and brought their families. And so to me, I think about, the recurrence of three sisters, and it really, I really tried to channel the three of them and the way they spoke, and the way they spoke English, though.
Hmm.
I heard them speaking French, and and it was so funny because I remember and then all of a sudden I noticed, I said, they're not speaking. What are they, what is that? That is, but I was like a little kid, and hearing them speak Akkadian or Kuriveni
Hmm.
and remembering that, so like it's an ancestral memory kind of thing. And it's also very much and how they spoke English. And so I wanted to be really true with Tivan's character to channel, my grandmother and her sisters. And there was at several points, that your mom had to stop and she says, "Wait, wait, wait, give me some time." Because she was hearing the voice of her grandmother in those words too. And I think that there was a lot of um ancestral memory happening. And I think the ancestors were really there with us in that room, because there were so many times and then when she and I would talk afterwards, after rehearsal, and talk about the languages and where to put them in. And she said, "You already have them. We just need to put the words in." She said, "Because it's there. I can hear it." And so I think that I wanted to, especially with that character, because the girls,
Mm,
the three sisters, and then their cousin who is also in the play, they're like our generation. They grew up, diasporic Native people.
mhm,
One lives in California, one lives in New York, one
mhm,
lives in New Mexico, so they're diasporic women coming
mhm,
home to really say goodbye to their aunt because she's ill. And so it was, multi-generational in so many ways and autobiographical in so many ways that that there, like I said, there were moments where we had to just kind of, stop and take a breath because we were all crying because we felt their presence very much there.
mhm, mhm.
Sorry, Shoba just popped in. Not yet,
Oh,
honey, in a little bit. So yeah, so that was very powerful. And like I said, it was just, there's something to say about being a diasporic person and then going to the land that your ancestors emerged from.
right,
There's something very powerful about that.
right.
And something, especially because we are such land-based people.
Mhm.
And our land is, slowly disappearing.
Yeah.
Um, just literally to drive down, they lived in, oh, my grandmother was born in, oh, I forgot where, in Saint, I think she was like, but they had moved around. They moved all over. But to go to, to go to the bayous and to go and walk in these places where they walked in these historical places, Lama, you know, to, um, to do that, again, was so profound. And then just hearing, and I could hear their voices. I could hear their voices in the water. I could hear their voices in the land. I could see them, you know, in the people. I went back and found the Barbans, and had no idea, but I looked out at them and I saw them. They were in the audience and I saw them and I said, "Those are my people," because
Oh
they
yeah.
look like, the people that I know. And sure enough, Herman and my mom are first cousins. So it
Yeah.
was like,
Oh yeah.
you know, but you recognize, your people, when
Mm-hmm.
you see them. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the I like, I have this idea of, the Louisiana that I hope to recognize
mm,
in using this idea of the play revival and then bringing folks together is this idea of like plurilingual, pluricultural. We all have very different ways, and we're all, we have like our own sort of like piece of the story. But that what you mentioned earlier, the Louisiana as old country, it really, and you were talking about Daryl Barthes talking about Americanization. That's something that, in New Orleans, I feel like, there we still might have some resistance. I mean, it's deeply
mm,
felt when you have like things like the Two Jacks sign coming down. Like that I'm speaking to you. Well, I'm across the river from Boston. I'm in Cambridge right now in
right.
MIT, right? Over in Boston, they have the Citgo sign still there. And there's no Citgo there. It's just that the people of Boston, they could not imagine the skyline without that
Not
little
having it.
sign.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. So it's a part of it. So like them, taking down a lit sign that's a landmark.
Mm,
It's just something that's like, what are we doing? Like, what are we
yeah.
giving up? And it really feel that sort of like that resistance of
Hmm.
Americanization, because we have, and my mom will have her stories about um her grandfather, on Papa Dre, and then
Hmm.
going from central Louisiana and settling in New Orleans, and then helping to
Yeah.
raise my mom, talking about how, okay, all those people out there, that's the Americans, right?
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
us, we are the Creole people. Like that's,
Hmm.
but we are we're it's a different world that we are
Hmm.
from. It's a
Hmm.
different
It
world
is.
we
Yeah.
represent.
Hmm.
And it's really like good to that diasporic quality that you were talking about, that here's family that lived away, and then
Hmm.
you come back into ancestral space, and you
Hmm.
have that same type of way that we talk to each other and connect with each other. And it's
Hmm.
like you feel that connection so strongly with
Right.
with each other and with ancestors. And it's like you don't need like you don't need like it's not a DNA test. It's not anything that
Yes.
the government
Yes.
is going to put on
Yes.
paper. It's like, oh,
Uh-huh.
and
Right.
you are,
Right.
I know now. I see who you are.
Yeah. I
And
know
it's
you're kin.
right.
You are my people. And
Right.
you knew that. Like when you and I first connected, I knew that we were related because I knew
Uh,
that on paper. But
yeah.
I feel like when we finally met in person, like 10 so years ago. Sorry, Kevin's arguing with somebody in the background.
Okay.
But when you and I met, the first time with my two of my kids, it was just like it's us, right? I just felt that kinship with you,
Yeah.
and just like I said, it's one of those things that, and then to be for especially for me, to be welcomed back into the community by the community,
Hmm.
that was very profound,
Hmm.
because until and that's the proverbial you, that's the general you, until you return to I mean, literally where they emerged from.
Hmm.
They came from there, and the other strains came there and mixed with them and became us. But until you walk the ground that your ancestors emerged from, it's you know you don't understand your place in the world. And having culturally been raised, a Creole Afro-Indigenous person, that was our culture. So I was raised that way, but in a diasporic sense. But
Hmm.
until I went there and saw the mounds um, and walked around and went to the cemetery and went to by LaBeouf and went to
Hmm.
all by Lamourie, went to all these places that I know that they lived in for thousands of years. Um, that was deeply profound for me. I'm a second generation Californian. My mother and father were both born in Los Angeles. I was born in Los Angeles. All three of my children were born in California. Um, so it, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of like talking around it, but sitting at family dinners with our big, large, extended family, we were Acadian Indigenous Creole people. That's because we ate the food. We
Hmm.
talked like that. We, talked about the ancestors. We told stories. And so, but to be raised outside of that place and then to come back and see where these stories came from, that was really powerful for us. And I
Hmm.
think that I got to lower I raised my hand. And so my hand
Okay.
raised on the thing. Um, I forget like the new, all the new,
Oh my goodness, the attraction
all the new
movements.
Zoom stuff that we have to, and every time and I talk with my hands, as you know, so I'm like, ah,
Right, right.
um, but, and the way you said that, when your mom's family moved to New Orleans and, even New Orleans, when people think of Louisiana, oh, everybody's from New Orleans. And I'm like, no, we're not from Bulbancha. That's the gathering place, but
Hmm.
that's not where we're from. We're from a specific, area and linguistic area and ceremonial area of Louisiana. And so it just, and the way that you described your mom and her siblings growing up in New Orleans and her grandparents coming to help them, and help raise them, that New Orleans maybe felt too American, or because there was that time
Hmm.
where, the native people from Bulbancha were like, there's, harkening back to Daryl's work, especially in Bulbancha, where people were, you know, like, we are no longer going to be this old world culture. We are going to be this culture. And I can imagine, what that was like for them to grow up there away from, so close, but yet so far to where we came from.
Hmm. I Yeah, there's a couple of things because so when we first met, it was I had invited you out to Mel King's brunch because
Yes.
by that point I was a regular, and it
The
was,
Sunday brunch.
yeah,
Yeah.
the Sunday brunch. And you know the family is West Indian, and then and West Indian and African American, and
Mhm.
it was something about how he crafted that brunch table
Mm.
to
Mhm.
where anybody could come in and share in that familial space. And so it was good to, like, reconnect in
Mm.
that type of space. And
Mhm.
that also that space also led me to recognize, like, there are Creole people that live here in the Northeast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're all over the, we
Yeah.
end
We
up
are
all
all
over the
over.
place.
Yeah.
But there's a world building that happens because I go into um Miss Marceline Donaldson. You go into her house and it's like, I'm stepping into something in the Garden District. It's
Oh,
something about, like,
yeah.
yeah, it's just something about, like, the world that we create around us.
Mhm.
Even though we might live away, there's still something about how we have been able to preserve, even within our built environment, like all of the things that keep us who we are.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and so I think, like, I just have two more questions, but I really want to, like, rest in that world building, because that
Mhm.
really gives us the opportunity to think about who we want to be
Mhm.
as a community, sharing in these connections, and then even thinking about, like, um going back to a previous conversation that we had with Rain, talking about
Mhm.
ecological connections, how the waters and the lands connect us all, but really taking that consciousness and that world building aspect and thinking about who do we want to be in the future?
Mm,
How,
mm,
how do you see that showing up
right.
in the work that you do with drama and theater and all that?
Mhm. Wow, that is such a great question and so multifaceted, because we have all of the original instructions, which and that's part of what language revitalization is about, because we have original instructions encoded in our languages, and the fact that that Kurivini and I say it's interchangeable. Kurivini, Acadian, Louisiana French. I feel like it is, it's the same language. It's even
Mm.
though some people say, oh, this is the white version, this is the black version, this is the indigenous. That's not
Right,
the same language. And I'm going to say it. Fight me on this. It's the
right.
same language. Um, and the idea that this language came out of this land base, right? It came from its indigenous people. It came from, and especially in Bulbancha, where it comes from, like you were saying, that Mobilian trade language that borrows words from all of the different languages that were there because people, had to be able to speak trade.
Mhm,
Um, and the idea that this form of French, which also has African words, which also has
mhm,
words in Ishakoi, which have words in Choctaw, um, again, because these were the indigenous people that were there when all of these, the strands of our ancestors came. And so, to talk about um, Louisiana French as an indigenous language. And I know, I get into trouble with that too, because where people are saying, well, you're saying that this, this European language. But I'm all because it's not the same language that they speak in French. Like we understand each other, but
mhm,
it's a totally different language. And because it came from the, it came from the, you know, it's the coming together, the gathering place, right? That Bulbancha is, means gathering place.
mm,
Um, that this language became something that was indigenous to this particular place in this particular part of the world. And
mm,
how we recognize that. So I feel like a lot of our original instructions are in the language. A lot of our original instructions are in mound building. So the idea that the collective has come together to be able to recreate a mound on a site where a mound was. We're getting that information, we're getting that from the ancestors because they're still there, and they still speak to us in our blood. And when I also, in addition to being a playwright, I'm like a dramaturg, and I teach theater history. I teach the academic classes because I have those three letters after my name, so I teach the
mhm,
academic and the scholarly classes. But looking at so my most of my academic work is in performance studies, and my the work that I do in performance studies is very much rooted in ceremonial performativity, and that is how we show up as Native peoples. So how we show up in the world as Native peoples, because that's who our identity is. And and the idea that how we show up in the world is very much rooted or engaged in the places where we came from. So for us, Louisiana and Mississippi, it used to be the same thing, way
mhm,
back when. So, being from Louisiana and Mississippi, and that's where, this aspect of who we are merged from. And and I think language revitalization, land back, and ceremonial revitalization go hand in hand because that's where all of our original instructions are. So the original instructions may not necessarily be in a specific place. The original instructions are here, embodied praxis.
Mm,
How we move about as Indigenous people from this part of the world, as Creole people, we move through the world in a very different way. But those original instructions are encoded not only in us, but they're encoded in our language, in our land, and in our ceremonies, and you cannot separate those. And
mm,
so for us to do this linguistic work is to do the performative work of who we are as Indigenous peoples. And to be able to recognize the ceremonial connection between the land, the language, and the people. Um, you just that we can't separate those anymore. And I think we need to really look at um, the work, and I think we are doing that. Our generation of people are doing that, and I hope that my kids are also doing that. Um, and your nieces are going to carry on that work also. Um, that because we come from this place, and this is the place that we emerged. This is, again, that's where those original instructions are, and to be able to listen to the ancestors because they follow us. We, I don't think anybody watching us would disagree,
mm.
especially the folks that we work with in the collective, would agree that a lot of the original instructions are encoded within us and how,
Right.
like I said, and how we move about the world. And then the ceremonies are going to, because the ceremonies now have a place to live, because they lived in us for a long time as diasporic people. Now they are going back home and they are living, in those spaces, living in the mounds as we re-engage with our cultural ceremonies and our cultural performativity. We re-engage and we reconnect and we go back. And I think that's why so many of us go back, like I said, in our generation, do go back. Rain's there now. Andrew wants to go back. I don't think Jeffrey ever left, so I'm thinking all of them. Monique too,
Mhm.
never really left. But, so it's just, when I think about the folks, and you go back all the time, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to get you to go when I go, but you go back all the time, and and because I feel like that we are able to do that now, and now is just the right time for us to engage with one another in community and with language and with our land base and our
Yeah.
ceremonies because that's what peoplehood is. And even though we all left and went somewhere else, we still come back because we're tied there, because we're
Hmm.
tied to this place.
Hmm.
I don't know if that answered that question in
No,
terms of
I guess
performativity, but
no, yeah, I think it's like it's yeah, it's that embodied um that embodied practice that we're all, it's the world building. It's how we move, it's how we are. Um even if I was to build off of something from Carl Sagan is like, or or is it that it's like the having stardust
Mhm.
be part of your
Your DNA.
makeup.
Yeah.
And and we say, rightfully so, like we say that we are the land is us.
Mhm.
also in this mode, we are a way for the land to know itself. Um,
Mm, mm,
and
mm.
that concept is like, oh, the universe can know itself through,
Through
us
us.
being being part of that makeup. So
Mm.
I think I think that was more Neil deGrasse Tyson though. But
Probably.
one of the astrophysicists, right? One of the
Who
science
get it,
communicators.
right? The astrophysicists seem to get it. I feel like they're catching up to, in terms of indigenous epistemologies and indigenous knowledges. I feel like they're, every day you see something that says, "Oh yes, scientists now believe that we carry the story of our ancestors in our DNA." And I'm like, yeah, well, we knew that, but never, now that, Western science has figured it out that, oh, it's true. But I'm like,
Uh,
we've known that this whole time.
yeah,
It's reified in our ceremonies too, and in the land.
yeah, yeah. So in our last couple of minutes, the this is the first part of the project. This is the recognized stories. So this recording is going to live on as part of the Indigenous Gulf Stream later this year, in November.
Mm-hmm.
But the second part, we both as dramaturges and midwives, we have been part of this birthing process because an artist is now going to take this conversation and have some kind of artistic output. So I wanted to give you the opportunity between now and July to like November. Are there things that are coming up that you would want the artist to kind of the things that you're doing that you might want the artist to kind of know about that maybe they can like
Ooh.
look into and stuff like that?
Yes. Well, I talked about going back in November and trying to, I'm trying to get everybody there, in November. So that's why I'm trying to get you back home in November. I got just like a little mini grant from my university to write about this, to write about Indigenous dramaturgical community-based practice. And so one of the projects that I had talked to John about was like a storytelling summit and bringing, so maybe not necessarily in November, but maybe November is the time when we start talking about putting together a storytelling summit that has all of the original instructions in it. And so maybe going in November, kind of having these conversations, our excuse to just kind of hang out with family that are doing this work, for me, I think is really important. Um, I, and storytelling can take on many forms, right? Songs
Mhm.
can be stories. Um, Folklore, of course, is stories. Um, there's that amazing book that I have loved all of my graduate career, um, Wisdom Sits in Places by Keith Basso, where he was writing about, as a participant observer, the Western Apache, um, and where he would talk about the place names in the Western Apache world were all related to stories. So what I would love to see us do is is what are these other ways of telling stories? So, through ceremony, through song, through actual story, through music, um, through language, again, what are these, what are the ways that we tell the stories of our ancestors? And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, um, your mom telling a traditional story or Jeff telling, a traditional story, but that's part of it. But the fact that it's your mom telling a story, it's Jeff. telling a story in Ishakoi. It's rain telling a story. Me singing a song, or writing a play. It it is very much who we are, and the fact that because we are a land-based culture, and our kinship networks are there, you know, all over the place. But what connects us is that place that we come from. And so to look at what is a story and how do we map these stories, specifically from place to place. And that's really important to me. And I think that, would be part of the revitalization work that is happening, to map where these stories come out of, because they're related to ceremony, they're related to place, they're related to people, they're related to deity, they're related to the spirit world.
Mhm.
And what are those different ways in which we tell the stories? And that's something that I'm really, really interested in.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
We
that's why I want to
I
get
get
you there in November so we can start
I
having, I mean, we can Zoom,
I
but I want us all to be together to be able to have those conversations.
yeah, in the other conversation that I had with Kim Vaz DeVille, she was talking about a Creole Futures convening around the same time. So, but I'm just uh I'm uh I'm just like, you know, thinking about like all the different connections. I think we're gonna find the path that,
Well,
number one, I will be back home, and
uh,
it won't be like crazy bouncing in between different things. But I really think like, um, it seems like November, there's a call to go home, and so. We'll see what where that takes me. I just kind of like I don't want to I learned not to intellectualize things too much, and I just
mhm,
kind of like let go, and then the wind's gonna push me.
exactly. No, the ancestors will guide you,
Yes.
to that place. And I
Uh,
know that I've been after you for a long time, to make this happen. And I'm just putting it out there.
okay. No,
And
no,
I'm
no.
gonna let
We
the
got
ancestors
plenty of
let us know.
collaborations that we got to do. But
Plenty
this
of
was
work to do, honey.
yeah. But this was one. I'm glad we caught each other.
I know.
I'm glad we got this conversation in.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Merci, gracias,
Oh,
tika, chiakoke.
mhm.
All of our languages, all of our cultures. I'm so glad
Yeah.
to be here with you. For recognized stories.
Woo, yay. I
Woo!
know, I'm so glad to be here with you because I just love you to pieces, and just any time that we can talk about our world, right?
Exactly.
Together with you. I'm there.
Exactly. All right, I'm gonna end the recording.
Okay.